Okay, are we all on? Yeah. Okay, so hello. I'd like to welcome you all to the launch of Voices from Lockdown, Experience of Cocooning as part of Social Inclusion Week. My name is Julie Carville. I'm a befriender and I'm also the chairperson of Older Voices Kildare. So it's a great source of pride for me to be involved with Older Voices. It's an organisation that's dedicated to creating a vibrant and active community where older people feel confident, self-empowered and fulfilled. I think we can all agree that the past 18 months have been challenging and have led to increased levels of isolation in society in general. And the Voices from Lockdown will shine light on the very personal perspectives of this from our older citizens. So without much else, I'm going to show you now a short video message from Karen Heavey from the HSC, and she's going to formally launch Voices from Lockdown Experience.
Hello, Karen Heavey here, Health Promotion and Improvement, Health and Wellbeing Manager in Dublin South, Kildare and West Wicklow. I just want to congratulate all involved in the Older Voices Kildare report on cocooning during COVID. It was a difficult time for everyone involved, and particularly for those in that age category who were advised to cocoon in order to keep safe during COVID. I'm interested in the numbers and the stories behind the report, and in particular I enjoyed reading the volunteer accounts and journals, which give a real insight into the day-to-day experience of living while cocooning and keeping safe. So as we re-engage with society, as we re-engage with our work, life, home, family, community, it's so important that we keep promoting health and do our best to keep healthy and keep safe. It's so important to look at our healthy eating, our physical activity, our engagement with our friends, our family, and that came through in this report in particular. The importance of services such as Older Voices Kildare and what they can offer to those that they befriend and the services that they offer in the wider context. I enjoy the numbers and the stories. Yes, we have the quantitative data, but it's so important to get the qualitative data to get to understand and get to grips with those who experience cocooning at this time. We are living through historical times, and to capture that experience in this report is crucial to document that timeline and document those experiences. So again, I want to congratulate all involved, to Sue, to Janet, to Denise, to County Kildare Leader Partnership Company, and to offer our continued support here in Health Promotion and from the Health and Wellbeing Division. Best wishes on your launch today. Take care.
Sorry, I was muted there. I'm now going to hand over to Susan Higgins, who will go through the context of the research.
Thank you, Julie. So good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Susan Higgins, and I'm the Befriending Support Worker with Older Voices Kildare. I would also like to welcome you all to the launch of our research piece around the impact of lockdown and cocooning. The research came about after months of listening to what the older person actually had to say. As I assessed people for telephone befriending, the similar threads in various conversations started to intertwine. Older people were literally the same, only when it came to the fact that the number that represented their years on this earth was a certain age. Each older person's individual experience of what made them who they were was so very different, and the majority were frustrated that they were being treated as one group. The same patterns emerged most of the time, that people were afraid, fed up, and so on, of being told they had to remain indoors and see no one on a human level. To be told that their own family members could be the very reason they contracted this potentially deadly virus, and indeed they were the group that the virus wanted, regardless of their level of fitness, health, ability, etc. People were getting more afraid as time went by, not just of the narrative that the media was giving, but also the impact that being so isolated was having on their mental health. People who had never considered themselves to be vulnerable were now starting to believe or see themselves this way. People were losing faith in themselves because being alone and isolated 24/7 meant they could see no way out or no way forward. On the other side of this story, people were feeding back the positives that were emerging. Communities coming together to support them, family and friends ringing more routinely or often, neighbours calling that might have rarely called before were coming to the window to check they had what they needed. There were people who had learned new skills and had learned how to Zoom or video chat. For some, they found that they were going out for socially distanced walks more often, and this in itself has become a good new habit to have. There is so much information captured so beautifully in the research piece that I won't reveal all of the spoilers. But as the befriending support worker, I would just like to thank each and every person who made this possible. My previous partner in crime, Denise Croak, my current partner in crime, the wonderful support worker, Janet Grundy. Janet came on board during COVID and I would have been lost without her. Our funder, RTE Does Comic Relief. Our researcher, Sarah Stevens. Our volunteer graphic designer, Sheena Kenny. Claire Murphy for the amazing sketches and the participants of those sketches who agreed to allow us to use their pictures for any future work around cocooning. To my wonderful colleagues at County Kildare Leader Partnership, thank you for your time and your support whenever we needed it. To the HSE Health Promotions for their ongoing long-term support. But most of all, to our amazing volunteers for the care and kindness that they have shown to all of our recipients of the Befriending Service throughout COVID. My final thank you must go to the participants who, without their honest, sometimes sad, and oftentimes hilarious feedback, none of this would have been possible. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand you over now to Sarah Stevens, our researcher.
Thank you very much, Sue, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. Give me one moment. I'm just going to put my slides up. Thank you very much. So I was commissioned by Older Voices Kildare early in this year to capture a snapshot of the lived experiences of older people in Kildare during lockdown. Older Voices Kildare has operated the Befriending Service since 2018. The service matches volunteers with older people to meet on a regular basis. Prior to COVID, the Befriending Service had about 80 recipients of face-to-face befriending. In the first week of Cocooning, these 80 people transferred to telephone befriending. And within the following week, the service took another 30 referrals. And this increased until it peaked at 183 calls made per week. The demand for the befriending service highlights how onerous the public health restrictions were on older people, who were required to cocoon or self-isolate for long periods of time. This report aims not to present a definitive experience of older people in Kildare during the period of restrictions, but to try and capture the variety of experiences and to look at lessons learned and what could be done better moving forward. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the survey, the process used, and then focus in on 3 topics: the impact of COVID-related public health restrictions, the befriending service, and re-engaging with society. Perhaps most importantly, I'll then go through some of the recommendations that came out of this piece of work. My presentation is very much an overview, and I'd encourage each of you to take a look through the report itself, because within the report, there's a lot of quotes from the survey participants showing their individual experiences of this period. So for the survey, 54 people were surveyed. 14 of those completed a detailed online survey, and 38 surveys were completed by phone interview. These were done by Susan Higgins, who you just met, the befriending support worker, and Janet Grundy, the volunteer befriending support worker. And the surveys took place between May and July of this year. So the survey participants were aged 55 and upwards. As you can see from the graph, this covered a wide spread of ages and was quite evenly spread across them. Of those surveyed, 85% were women and 64% lived alone, while 36% lived with others. The survey asked a series of questions to understand the public health restrictions and how they impacted participants' daily life. With each survey participant, there was a different experience. And what I'm going to highlight now is just some of the patterns that came through the research. But as I've said before, there was not one definitive experience. So it's just some trends. So we asked some questions around physical health, and the restrictions had quite an impact on that. As you can see from the left of your screen, 69% of those surveyed said that the amount of physical activity they'd done decreased since the introduction of restrictions, and 46% said that their physical health had deteriorated, and 41% said it had stayed the same. Participants shared the impact on their bodies from this period, including weight loss or gain, muscle weakening or wastage, and a stiffening of their bodies. Many said that they were unable to do the physical activities that they'd done prior to COVID, and that they're now less mobile and concerned about the risk of falling. For some, the physical deterioration was linked to their mental health. The mental stress of COVID affected their physical health, and individuals lost the motivation to be physically active. The questions around mental health revealed that 59% of participants felt that their mental health had deteriorated. Reasons given included increased anxiety and fear due to COVID, not being able to spend time with family and friends, loneliness, delayed medical care, no longer being able to do their usual activities, and a lack of routine. Some participants shared that the way older people were treated during this period made them feel as if they were invisible or a nobody to society and the authorities. More broadly, in relation to health, 45% of participants had their medical care delayed or cancelled since the introduction of COVID-related health restrictions. There's a variety of reasons for this, including medical staff being deployed elsewhere, outbreaks of COVID in hospitals, and carers being unavailable due to the risk of or exposure to COVID. However, it's not all negative. For some, the use of technology in medical care has been a great change, such as appointments delivered by phone or Zoom, and they hope that this is to continue beyond the COVID period. There's also several questions about social interactions and loneliness, and as is to be expected, 85% of survey participants said that their social interactions have decreased since the introduction of restrictions. One particularly stark finding is in relation to loneliness. As you can see with the first graph there, 6% of people said that prior to COVID, they felt lonely often, and 47% felt that they felt lonely some of the time. If we move on to the second graph on this page, you can see that 70% have said that since the introduction of the public health restrictions, that they feel lonely often, and 21% some of the time. Only 9% felt lonely hardly ever or never since the introduction of those health restrictions. So in response to COVID, as you'll all be aware, the government considered older people, so age 70 and above, and those with underlying conditions as vulnerable groups, and asked these individuals to cocoon. These restrictions included that a person should not be going to the shops, shouldn't leave their house or garden for exercise, and should have no or minimal interaction with other people. The survey asked participants, did the narrative around cocooning affect how they saw themselves and how others saw them? These questions elicited a wide range of responses. For some, the narrative was important for them, and for others around them, in order to understand the situation and the measures that individuals needed to take. However, for many others, this narrative, and especially the treatment of people 70 and older as a homogenous group, led to people who'd not previously felt old or vulnerable, viewing themselves in this way and feeling that others around them also viewed them this way. When participants were asked, were there changes that they'd make to the approach that the government took to the messaging, Some felt that it was necessary and that they wouldn't make changes, while for others, this treatment of all over 70-year-olds as a homogenous group was an issue. For many, the blanket label of vulnerable did not acknowledge the different levels of health amongst this group and the independent lives that many were living. Many survey participants pointed out that they felt ignored or forgotten, and that while the aim of these measures were to keep them safe, they were not included in the discourse about them. So the next section of the survey looked at the Befriending Service and asked people about their experiences of it, where that was relevant. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there was a huge increase of people using the Befriending Service after the COVID restrictions. And so as you'll see from this chart, that more than half of those surveyed who do use the Befriending Service had got involved in the last year. For those who'd been involved in using the service prior to COVID, 85% said the importance of the service has increased for them, while 15% said the importance has stayed the same. When participants were asked what they most liked about the Befriending Service, they repeatedly identified confidentiality, friendliness, and the non-judgmental service as being the most important components for them. The befrienders or volunteers provided both emotional and practical support. Particularly in the early stages of the restrictions, they help befriendees to adjust through practical supports, including arranging grocery shopping or accessing services by phone or online. Participants also identified that it was a way to stay connected and to feel supported. For many people, the phone calls broke up the day, and for some, there was a comfort knowing that if they wanted to talk, they could ring their befriender. Many survey participants said that they felt forgotten or ignored through the government messaging around cocooning. And for those who engaged with the Befriending Service, the importance of feeling listened to by their befrienders came up repeatedly in survey responses, in contrast to how they felt about the government messaging. Many survey participants shared their appreciation and fondness for their individual befriender, that the service is personalized to each user was important, as is the flexibility to rearrange calls if a person was busy or unable to talk. According to one survey participant, the volunteer that rings me always wants to hear how I am and never gives up. Even if I don't feel like talking, she'll ring again another time. So the final section of the survey is the forward-looking stage. So participants were asked how they feel about re-engaging with society. And so one of the questions was, do you feel anxious about re-engaging? And so 40% said no, but 34% said that they're somewhat anxious, and 26% said that yes, they are anxious. When asked if they feel prepared about re-engaging, 28% said that they don't, 26% said somewhat, and 46% said yes, they feel prepared. The surveys were completed between May and July 2021, and at the start of May, most people in Ireland aged 70 and older had received their first dose of vaccine. And by the end of July, most people aged 60 and over had received both vaccines. However, despite the positive levels of vaccine uptake, the increase in the Delta variant and concerns about vaccine effectiveness against it was one fear that we heard from many survey participants. For those who are feeling prepared for re-engaging with society, the reasons that they gave include being vaccinated, the adoption of good public health practices such as face masks, social distancing, and hand sanitization by the wider public, and protecting themselves by following the public health advice and deciding what situations they're comfortable in. Survey participants who didn't feel prepared or felt only somewhat prepared gave reasons that include that COVID is still out there, that you can still get COVID even if you're vaccinated, that not everyone is vaccinated, that there's a fear of new variants, and that not everyone is following the public health practices. Another reason that came up several times is that participants identified that they'd lost their confidence after the long period cocooning, and that this has contributed to fear of crowded places and being around people who are coughing or noisy or drunk. The report looks at these issues in more detail, but building on the responses given in the survey, I'll come back in a moment to what recommendations can be taken from it. So the report contains recommendations in response to some of the issues that came up through the research. So for the Befriending Service, at a strategic level, there's a need to ensure consistent and sustained funding for the maintenance and strategic future development of the service. At a practical level and in line with public health guidelines, there's the opportunity to explore the option of resuming some face-to-face meetings between befrienders and befriendees and looking at potentially a new blended way of doing that. Moving to re-engaging with society, the survey responses provided insight into what made people more likely to feel ready to re-engage, and this has formed some of the recommendations. So how that can improve is through supporting people to be able to conduct risk assessments of their situations, resilience training to address loss of confidence over the COVID period, the introduction of activities such as walking groups that have both social and health benefits and are done in a COVID-friendly way, well, not friendly, but in a safe way. More opportunities to upskill on computers or IT was one issue that survey participants really identified. And then the promotion of social prescribing to support individuals involved in activities that match their interests and that they feel safe participating in. More broadly, there's a need for the consistent and sustained funding of services for older people based on the needs that older people identify. And very much tying into the need for older people to be central to any discussion that is about them, there's a need to develop a county-wide mechanism to support older people to represent themselves where decisions are being made that affect them. So finally, I hope that this presentation has given you insight into the impact of those public health restrictions on older people in Kildare. For many of the survey participants, this was an incredibly difficult period for them, and the Befriending Service, through the support and comfort of the befrienders and staff, was vital to many people. While this report is focused on the impact on older people, it would be amiss not to highlight that the Older Voices staff and volunteers went above and beyond to ensure some human contact when people were completely isolated. For each of those 180 plus calls in that particularly busy week, but with the end of the phone, and their empathy and willingness to listen and to really hear what the befriendee was saying made a huge difference in people's lives. Given the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on older people, it's crucial that the appropriate services are restarted and that gaps are identified in service provision. For example, transportation was an issue that came up several times. And supports are put in place to address the loss of confidence identified by participants and the high levels of anxiety about re-engaging with society. More broadly, the period of public health restrictions has highlighted how dependent many people are on supports provided by non-governmental or community service providers. There's a need for funding supports to be stabilised, to recognise the importance of these services and the impact that inconsistent or stop-start funding can have on their provision. Finally, and central to the findings, is the need for older people to be consulted in matters that impact them, both in any future health restrictions, but also in the services and supports that they need. We're now going to go to a short conversation between Trish, a befriendee, and Janet, the volunteer befriending support worker, so that you can hear one person's experiences. But I'm going to wrap up with the words of one survey participant that brings this message and the importance of being listened to that the Befriending Service demonstrated so well during this period, home for me at least. The participant says, I have a brain in my head and a tongue in my mouth. I can speak for myself if someone would just listen. Thank you very much.
Hello, Janet. Good morning. How are you?
Fine. And how are you?
I'm good. I'm good today. Today is a good day. There have been a few not so good days, but today is a better day.
Oh, that's good. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself, Trish?
My name is Trish. I am 62 years old. I was born with a condition called cerebral palsy, and within that condition, I also I'm quadriplegia, which means I have no movement from the lower chest to my legs, and I have some movement within my right hand and arm. I have speech. I'm fully coherent in my mind. I'm fairly bright, but I have very heavy physical disabilities, both of which I live with. I'm also autoimmune deficient.
Have you always had paraplegia with it?
Yes, but they have become much greater over the course of COVID, because I wasn't as physically active and out there as I once was. I never thought of myself as physically or mentally vulnerable until the government started to plant that idea in my head. And then it was from then on, from the beginning of the first lockdown to now, my physical state, if you like, my physical disabilities have gotten almost 100% greater, in that I am less mobile than I was. It is harder to sit up straight towards when I was out and about before. It is much harder to get up and get into my chair in the morning, which I use 2 carers to do everything for me. There will be changes to the normal routine of care. Some days it would be later than others. If somebody on the caring side got COVID, or for instance, one of my girls had to go to somebody else who one of their carers got sick or anything like that. So times were different, and times were getting up and going to bed were marginally different. You never knew from one day to the next what time you were going to get. You know,
that's a problem, isn't it? That can be quite a problem.
Yes, it's because you're either up too early and going back to bed too late. Some days I was sitting in my chair 12 hours straight, which was and can be very uncomfortable.
It's a long time.
Is there a second video there, or is that it?
That's it now, Julie. I think we're going to hear from...
We're waiting for a second one. Okay, so from that now we're going to go over to Carl Duffy from CKLP, who will say a few words.
I think we'll be able to go to that video now, so I'll run it now. Sorry about that.
Of the government, that when they talked about people, and no disrespect to you, Janet, or older people, when they talked about older people, they talked about all of us as if we were older. Some of us have other conditions, like my physical conditions, and we are not fully in the old age bracket just yet,
No.
because I'm not 65. So they keep telling me when I apply for other things, but you're not 65, so you can't have that or you can't have this.
That's
But yet,
ridiculous, isn't it?
yet they were putting me in the box of what was quoted as the older people. And then they started to use the word which I hate the most, the vulnerable,
Yes.
because I wasn't feeling the vulnerability as I am now. I'm feeling it now because I've come to know it over the course of the pandemic. My panic attacks started to come back when they told us we could go out in the second wave, and I had my first vaccine. So I did go out.
Yeah.
I went to go to the bank with a mask on me, but I never quite got there because I got to the foyer of the bank and I had the most massive panic attacks that I could have ever imagined. I have panic attacks primarily that come from separation anxiety.
Yeah.
I started to suffer these panic attacks 8 years ago when my brother was murdered here in Athy, and they have been under cover, if you like. I could manage them, but during the pandemic and during the releases that they allowed us to have and get out, they grew and they came back with a vengeance, and I had to take them back under control. Even now, Janice, it's primarily free to go out. I don't go out maybe once in a month. If I have to see the doctor, I might wander over to him if the weather is fine, or if I have to go to the bank for some reason, then I will do that. But it's either one or the other. I cannot go from shop to shop like I used to do because I just don't feel comfortable. And don't ask me to eat in a restaurant. I just wouldn't be able to do it. With the fear, I just feel sick. I feel nauseated, and thinking of the people coming towards me and closing in on me and possibly them carrying the virus starts to well up in my head, and I cannot cope. The only human interaction that I have received from anybody is through the befriending, I don't know what to call it, the befriending association that Older Voices run, and that is the young lady that comes to me. If she didn't honestly come to me when she did, my mental health would have shattered me completely, and it would have taken me to a level that I don't even want to think about.
Okay, so now we're going to pass over to Carol Duffy now to say a few words.
Thanks, Julie. On behalf of County Kildare Leader Partnership, I just want to briefly say how pleased we are to be in a position to host and to support the work of Older Voices, and to acknowledge the incredible work that, as we've heard so far this morning, incredible work that has been done by Older Voices during the period of the pandemic. As Sarah mentioned there, up to 180 calls, and we can see from the words there, testimony of Trish, those calls could be the only human contact that a person would have in a week. CKLP is a local development company. It's based on community development principles, and we seek to do our work in response to the needs of the community. And obviously, to respond to the needs of the community, you firstly have to listen to to those needs. And this is where Older Voices and this research is so valuable. The work of Older Voices is primarily to give a voice, and it's a voice to older people who, not just in the pandemic, but in everyday society, are in danger of being overlooked or disregarded, and in a certain sort of sense is seen as not contributing to society because they don't have economic worth in some ways. And the lovely presentation which Sarah gave gives a lot of food for thought for us and for society in general, in listening to the experiences and listening to the recommendations from the research. CKLP is always working to support the full development of the person, and that means every person in society, regardless of age or of ethnicity or economic circumstances. And so we're delighted to be associated with Older Voices, obviously, but delighted to be here today for this launch and to listen to the voices in the report and also to the recommendations. I'm not going to say very much more. Sue has thanked everyone associated with this, but I want to add my words to Sue herself, to Denise, obviously, who is still with us in many ways here this morning, and to Sarah for doing the research, but particularly to the volunteers. And also I want to shout out, as Sarah said there, service like this cannot continue unless funding is consistent. I'd like to thank the funders for the research, but also a shout out to ongoing funding for our work and the work of Older Voices. But this morning, this is a celebration of the voices of people, and I just want to thank everyone associated with it and hand you now back to the chairperson, Julie.
Okay, so I'm going to just wrap up by thanking you all for coming. I think the guys have mentioned everybody, and there's probably a lot more that we just can't fit in, too many to mention. And I just want to finish by saying that if anybody is interested in getting a hard copy of the research, there are a small few copies available, and your contact for that is Susan Higgins. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.